Hey everyone, I'm Rithi. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you guys how you can do watercolor lettering and I'm going to give you my top tips. So let's begin. So talking about the supplies, we have the watercolors. So for the watercolors, you can actually use the ones that come in a pan, the watercolor cakes, or these ones that come in a tube. I'm going to show you guys how you can use both of them later in this video. Next comes the brushes. So here I have my aqua brushes with me. So these are water brushes that you can use. These are nice and rounded, as you can see. So make sure they have a nice and rounded top. Now another thing is that I would prefer to start off with using a nice and small sized brush and not something too big, since it's a little easier to control. Next we have our normal paint brushes. So of course you can use these as well, as long as they're nice and rounded and have a nice tip at the top. Now make sure you don't use brushes like these, which are frayed at the top, because you won't be able to get nice and thin upstrokes. And also don't use flat brushes like these. So it's better to use nice and rounded brushes. Coming to the paper, you can honestly use any kind of paper as long as it's nice and smooth. Regular printing paper is also fine actually, as long as you're a beginner. Just make sure that the paper you're using is smooth. Okay guys, so let's begin. I'm going to start off by using these watercolor cakes and a normal brush. So let's begin. You want to start off by taking some watercolor and water on your brush and just adjust your brush on how you want to hold it. Once you're comfortable, start making some basic strokes. So start off with some basic thin upstrokes. It can take some time to get them right. It's okay, just keep practicing. So once you get the hang of these, then try some nice and thick downstrokes. I'm going to make some horizontal lines, some vertical ones. Okay, so once you are comfortable with your brush, start off by making some basic strokes. So if you guys don't know about the basic strokes, I will link the video down in the description box below. It is really important to know the basic strokes, since they are the basis of hand lettering and calligraphy. So practice this a couple of times. Next, I'm going to show you how we can do this using a water brush. So again, there's not actually much difference between a water brush and a paintbrush. Just significant differences that I find are that in a water brush, since the water is already inside, we don't really have to keep dipping it in water. We can just directly take the paint and add how much ever water we want. But since it is inside, we have to press. Sometimes I end up pressing too much and it becomes a little too watery, just like that. So that is one thing that I think I like about paint brushes. I always know how much water I need to add and I usually don't really mess it up. Again, I'm going to show you guys all the basic strokes. Now, one thing about watercolors, they are really forgiving. For example, they're really good for beginners, since you can always go back and correct your mistakes, which you can't actually do using brush pens. So if I do end up making a really thin line, I want to go back and make it thicker, I can actually just go and make it thicker and you won't see the difference. Just like this one here, I can go back in and add more color make it thicker. So I think they're a little more forgiving and they make you get less frustrated. So I think they're a little better than brush pens if you are a beginner. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how you can use the watercolor tubes. So these tubes are a little more pigmented than the watercolor cakes or the ones that come in a pan. And I think they are a little better since you can easily just control the amount of pigment you want and the amount of water you want to add, how watery you want your color to be, since we're going to add the water to the paint in our palette. So I'm going to use them and show you. Now if I compare this to the ones that I use in the pan, you guys can see that these are a little more pigmented, mainly because I can control the amount of water I want them to have and I can control the amount of color. So guys, here's a time lapse of me doing all the letters using watercolor and a water brush. So this is just to show you guys my style of hand lettering when I use watercolors. Of course, yours can be anything that you like, whatever you're comfortable with. Okay guys, so I wanted to show you guys a quick difference between brush pen and using a paintbrush or a water brush, basically in watercolor lettering. So let's begin. So the first thing is that making changes using a brush pen isn't as easy as making changes using a normal paintbrush. I mean, we can go in and try and add more color, and it's not impossible, but definitely it comes out a lot better when you're using a paintbrush or when you're doing watercolor lettering. I can just go in and, you know, make some line thicker, maybe add in more color somewhere or add in a different color. It all turns out to be very natural using watercolor. The next thing is that when you're actually using a brush pen, we don't actually have to dip it in ink or, you know, dip it in water or anything like that. We just use it and the ink flows by itself. Whereas in watercolor lettering, we have to dip it in water and color, and we basically have to keep dipping it in, which can be good and bad at the same time. So good because we can always add more color, do shading, all of those kinds of things, but again, we might sometimes end up adding a little too much water and it might get spoiled. Now for beginners, when you're using a brush pen, it can be a little frustrating at times because it can be a little difficult to get the strokes right, and if you make a mistake, then it's really difficult to correct it. But when you're using a watercolor, you can easily correct your mistakes. It's a little more forgiving, as I did say in the video, and they are a little less frustrating to use comparatively, since we can always correct our mistake. You know, when you're having problem making thick down strokes, we can always make it thicker, and that just gives us a sense of satisfaction and increases our motivation. Alright guys, that was it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did like the video, subscribe and hit the bell button, give it a thumbs up, and I will see you next time. Bye guys.